Hello, YouTubers, friends, and compatriots, bootlicker, shills, death slicers, peasants, vassals, spooks, CIA agents. I'm a useful idiot, and now I want to talk about the fact that arms airlift to Syria rebels expands with CIA aid. And that's on the headlines in the New York Times today. And it says, lethal assistance reaches Assad's foes on Jordanian, Saudi, and Qatari planes. So, how interesting is that? Now, first of all, of course, the United States has been involved in these arms shipments all along. And so that's part of the story. And another part of the story is how all these countries use proxies. Iran uses proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah, and the United States uses proxies like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and that's just how it goes. That's how these things are done. That way there's plausible deniability, as they like to say in government circles. So here we go. The United States, of course, has denied all along that we've been giving lethal aid to the Syrian rebels, and that other people are basically doing that. And of course, if Saudi Arabia is involved, the United States is involved, and there's no surprise there whatsoever. The CIA and Saudi Arabia pretty much work hand in hand in everything. And but the fact that we have Syria surrounded by all these countries that are willing to ship in arms to somebody that wants to topple the government is an interesting scenario. But I'll get to that later. First, let me read a little bit from this article, because it's interesting the way they present it to us. It says, with help from the CIA, Arab governments in Turkey have sharply increased their military aid to Syria's opposition fighters in recent months, expanding a secret airlift of arms and equipment for the uprising. And this has all been assembled according to air traffic data, interviews with officials in several countries, and accounts of rebel commanders. This is where it gets interesting. The airlift, which began on a small scale in early 2012 and continued intermittently. So this program of shipping arms into the Syrian rebels has been going on for at least a year. And this whole time, there's been all this denying that this was going on. And I did a video recently, of course, of massive arms shipments that were purchased by Saudi Arabia and the U.S. and bought through from Croatia and from the old Yugoslav Republic. And these arms were shipped into Syria. But now, as it turns out, we've had this whole program going on for a year. And it said it's expanded into a steady and much heavier flow late last year. It has grown to include more than 160 military cargo flights by Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. And so this is a huge operation. And the article even says, and even as the Obama administration has publicly refused to give more than non-lethal aid to the rebels, the involvement of the CIA in the arms shipments has shown that the United States is more than willing to help its Arab allies support the civil war. So anyway, and Syrian opposition figures and some American lawmakers and officials have argued that Russian and Iranian arms shipments to support Mr. Assad's government have made harming the rebels more necessary. So the fact that Iran and Russia are arming Syria is, of course, requiring that even more arms get shipped into Syria by the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan, and everyone else. So, so funny how that goes. But what this tells us, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, all these states in that region use proxies. So when we see all these denials going on and these accusations that the U.S. has been shipping arms into Syria for a couple of years now, well, it turns out it's all true. And for the Obama administration to pretend that they haven't been and then suggest they're going to give non-lethal aid, and now recently said that they will applaud European efforts to lift an arms embargo and ship more weapons into Syria. And so this is where it's going to escalate. So we will now have all this Saudi weapon shipments all out in the open. Now we're going to have the Eurozone shipping massive amounts of weapons into Syria, and the U.S. will continue doing what it's been doing, shipping massive weapons into Syria. And part of the problem is the fact that a lot of ammunition has gone through in a short amount of time in Syria, and the fact that the Syrian army is well equipped with a lot of heavy equipment, and most of the arms we're willing to give to insurgents in Syria have to be small arms, because we know that a lot of those weapons are going to end up turning on us at some point. And so that's the scenario there. But another aspect of this whole thing that I find interesting, and I'm surprised no one talks about, is let's suggest for a moment that the Assad regime is the legitimate government of Syria. And he's been in power for decades, let's say 40 years. And let's say all of a sudden he's on the U.S. shit list. And so this effort is made to create an insurgent army armed by the CIA and trained by the CIA in all the bordering countries around Syria, which include Jordan and Israel and Lebanon and Iraq, and all these countries being used to train, in Turkey, all these countries being used to train the Free Syrian Army, arm them, train them, and send them back into Syria to topple the government. And let's say that the Assad regime, if they were the legitimate government of Syria, defended their government and their country from an insurgent army of terrorists. And I'm only saying that because I know there's a lot of people that have that hard scenario to believe, because the Assad regime has been painted so villainously. And yes, a lot of people have died in this conflict, but that's what happens in a civil war. And it becomes even more complicated when you have a lot of bad actors and foreign interventionists all involved in there. So you have Mossad agents, you have CIA agents, you have mercenaries, you have Al-Qaeda, you have Free Syrian Revolutionaries, you have Kurds fighting for their interests in their region. You have the Syrian regime, you have Iranian agents, you have Hezbollah, you have Hamas. Everybody's in there. So this is a very complicated situation, and I have no love for the Assad regime, but just consider for a minute what an act of war it would be, and be in Syria's shoes when all the countries around them have insurgents being trained and guns being shipped in to topple your country. So an interesting scenario. I'm just suggesting that people consider that scenario instead of just the one that Assad is an evil despot and all of a sudden needs to be taken down because he's killed so many of his people in this revolution. So anyway, well, there, I've said my piece on that, and so here we go. Boy, there's going to be a lot of guns being shipped into Syria in the next 2 or 3 months. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.